We have had some really big updates when it comes to Chrono Odyssey and Archeage Chronicles. Chrono Odyssey is possibly changing like literally everything about the game, and Archeage Chronicles might not be a traditional MMO as you know it. And what's more, there's actually going to be more information this week as we get the Cacao financials. Let's jump in. Let's talk about it. We're going to start with Chrono Odyssey because this news was actually quite a few days old now. I think it's been out for about a week. And effectively, they posted the dev notes part 2. You may remember they did a big update. Well, what they decided to do is do an even bigger update. I think there's literally like 6,500 words in this update, and it covers so many systems that it's actually going to be impossible for me to talk about them without this video taking 20,000 years. However, I will try and do a very quick TLDR because some of it is interesting, but I'll try and leave a link to the Steam update because, as I said, it's massive. And if you are really a huge fan, then maybe you want to check it out. Although, you know, I wouldn't blame you if you just simply don't. So let's jump to the key points. First, they talk about combat. They're going to basically overhaul combat. They're going to improve the responsiveness and the controls. They're going to also add hit, impact, and feedback. Now, I think they actually mentioned stagger. The monsters are going to stagger. I don't necessarily like stagger, but I do think like enemies need to have like a hit reaction. So you need to sort of like flinch when you get hit, but not necessarily make it so that the enemy doesn't do anything, because then you can just like stagger them to death. But they're working on that. They're going to make it so that there's like strategic depth and add more class identity. That's going to be that matrix system, which I think is going to be similar to like what Bellator is offered or something like Diablo 4. And the enemy AI is going to get smarter as well. They're also going to improve the world exploration and content. They're going to make the world itself more rewarding, adding caves and landmarks, and very importantly, a better navigation tool. And the important bit here is that they're actually going to make it so that there's a height indicator, which I remember Waydot was complaining of, and to be fair, it's a very good point. You would sometimes be standing where you're supposed to be standing, except actually it's meant to be like 50 meters down, and you don't realize that. They also say that they're going to make exploration more worthwhile. To be fair, it kind of felt rewarding as it was, but it would be nice to be even more rewarded for this with like hidden quests, rare achievements, etc. They do say that dungeons are going to get some RNG in terms of like replayability in the enemy types and stuff like that. They're going to rework the local quests, which are basically like those event quests where you walk over to them and something's happening. A lot of them were very repetitive. It was like, kill these enemies and loot this chest. And then the next big thing that I want to talk about that they mentioned is the progression and the systems. Specifically, they talk about how there's going to be faster progression. It sounds like after level 10, they're going to reduce that grind a little bit. Because once you get to level 10, the game sort of slows down a little bit. You don't really know what to do. And there was a little bit of a moment between 10 and 15 where you really started struggling for content and struggling for things to do. And then as soon as you hit 15, then you can do, I don't know, like the dungeon and the trials and stuff like that, that solo trial. And with that, they want to make it so that there's less repetitive farming as well, just to reduce the grind, I guess. They also mentioned that they're going to be adding gear and skill presets, because one thing you can't do right now is like have a build, save that build, and then change that build. That also applies to your gear. If you have like a tanking build and then a DPS build or gear set, you couldn't do anything about it. So, well, they're going to add that, which is very nice. They're apparently going to rework the crafting UI to make it easier to understand. They are also going to be improving the technical visuals and UI polish overall. I mean, of course, they're going to keep working on performance, so they just reiterate that here. They also say that they're going to be completely redoing the UI, making it less generic, effectively making it so that the game is a lot more playable on mouse and keyboard. And they officially confirm that they're basically going to be looking at the animation when it comes to moving so that your character doesn't feel like it's sliding. For the lore nerds, it sounds like they're going to be changing the narrative as well and doing a complete overhaul there. There is a section where they talk about camera and FOV, but instead of it being like, we're going to add an FOV slider, I'm going to let you zoom out, what they actually say is that we're going to make it so that if the terrain's blocking you, then, you know, it doesn't zoom in, or the trees don't get in the way and they become invisible and stuff like that. And I'm like, that sounds great, but I would very much like an FOV slider and a little bit extra zoom, and for it to remember my zoom actually as well. Honestly, there's a lot more than that, but I know most of you simply won't care right now. It's all talk. What we actually need to see is to see the actual game. Probably not just in a trailer, but in like gameplay presentations. What I think Chrono Odyssey should really do is be very quiet until the closed beta test 2. And then that should effectively be a marketing test and have it be, you know, very, very polished, very nearly ready. Until then, with all respect, it's kind of a lot of talk and no action. So it's simple. We need to see that game. There's so much text that it's like ridiculous. I said it would take me probably, I don't know, an hour or so to go through all of that in detail. But it's nice to know that they're communicating, and for those of you who really want to read everything, like, go ahead. Even myself, somebody who's very into the game, it's like, I don't know, text is just not that interesting. I care more about like when I can get to play it, when I get to see it, and when I get to feel it. We'll see it when we see it. We'll probably hear news about Chrono Odyssey's actual release schedule in the Kakao financials that are happening, I think, Wednesday morning. So basically 2 days from this. Then let's move on to Archeage Chronicles, another game that we'll hear a little bit more about at the Kakao financials. But they too have done a developer diary with some interesting information. And then there's been an interview with, well, a couple of different outlets, but the one I'm going to concentrate on is massively OP, because some really weird, interesting things in there that I want to talk about. So in the dev update that they posted on Steam, there's some really like crucial information. They talk about how they didn't just want to do a sequel to Archeage, the original MMORPG. That makes it sound like it's the only MMORPG, but you know what I mean, the original Archeage. And what they're doing is they're setting this story like 50 years afterwards. Things have changed. It's the same universe, but things have changed. But they say this is not Archeage 2. They then go on to say that this is not even a traditional MMORPG. Now, there's two things to unpack there. One, it's funny that they say that it's not Archeage 2 because it was literally called Archeage 2 when they announced it. So I wouldn't be, it's not surprising that some people might consider it Archeage 2. But what they are effectively saying here is that this is nothing like the original Archeage. And to prepare people that this might not be a traditional MMORPG as you know it. They say that they're making a discovery-driven online action RPG. I feel like more words get added to this kind of like sentence as we go. The combat will be tighter. The pacing will be more focused. But it is still a shared world and still like a social world, but they specifically say that it's not built for massive Zerg fights or dozens of overlapping systems. So I think what they're trying to tell us, the TLDR, is that this is an Archeage 2, like a sequel to Archeage, and whilst it will have like a lot of MMO feelings, I've just realized that in one of the pictures that I'm looking at right now, there's a glider, but we'll come back to that another day, I think. But whilst it will feel like an MMO in some regards, don't expect hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of players all congregating in one spot. I think it's going to feel more like a solo or co-op game, but you can group up with people at any time. They'll probably all be on the same server, but just don't expect thousands of players. And I think the reality is action combat doesn't really work in that mass scale, or at least it's not worked, and there's like technical elements that they have like issues with. There are games trying to make the mass combat work with action combat, but that remains to be seen. I actually think New World with its 50v50 wars that's pretty impressive really at this stage. Anyway, they're trying to say here it's not a traditional MMORPG. Whether or not it's an MMO enough for you or me, I don't really know until we learn about it more, I guess. They go on to talk about how it is obviously action combat. It's going to be punchy, it's going to be responsive. There's like really satisfying weapon-specific skills. It's going to be smart play instead of like simply spamming buttons. Yeah, it sounds good in that sense. But there's other things that it's going to have. It's going to have storytelling, exploration. In fact, they mentioned that like discovery-driven online RPG, which if I'm honest, has me deeply concerned. Because whilst I know a lot of people like the idea of like going into a world and an MMO world and discovering with other people, what will ultimately happen is people will simply, go on Google, go on YouTube, use AI, whatever the hell the tool is, and just find the most optimal way of finishing the quests. The players will optimize the fun out of it. It's just that simple. There's also going to be things like life skilling, housing, crafting, obviously. They mentioned shared housing. It sounds like that they're actually planning on ramping up a little bit of information with Archeage Chronicles, because they said there's been like a few focus groups that have been under NDA, but they're going to open up the testing. So we might see a closed beta test at some point for Archeage Chronicles, which would be very exciting. And then there was an article, or maybe like an interview that they had with that massively OP had with Excel Games, people are making Archeage Chronicles, and there was just some really interesting things in there. They talk about how they see themselves as being a cross between Zelda and Archeage, obviously, and the outcome of that is Archeage Chronicles. And then I have a bit of a problem because there's things that they mention that I didn't necessarily see in the article. For example, they ask a question about like a channel-based system. I don't see that on the Steam article, and I wonder if there's like AI translation here. But channel-based would suggest layers, and I would strongly suspect that Archeage Chronicles might have layers. Well, I don't just suspect it, they pretty much overtly say it. The question that they mentioned, the channel-based system, is actually referring to housing and these neighborhoods. And it sounds like there's going to be effectively like a hybrid system. It's not going to be like New World where, you know, you literally have your own house and then somebody else can have the same house, but it's just completely separate. But it's also not going to be like, well, I don't know enough about Final Fantasy, but it's also not going to be like super competitive, like that only you can have that house and then nobody else can have it. It sounds like more that there's going to be like a neighborhood that is all shared between the people in that neighborhood, but there'll be different layers of that neighborhood, if that makes sense, which to me it kind of does. Hopefully it's good. An important question for a lot of people will be the existence of PvP. We know it's not a sequel to Archeage in the traditional sense. Archeage was known for its PvP. So is there PvP in Archeage Chronicles? And they say yes, there is, right? Of course there is. But it's not like the main singular focus. It's just one aspect of many. It's not going to be like faction wars. There's not going to be open ganking and stuff like that. It's going to be much smaller and a much more like focused part of the overall design. I think they do plan on having like trade runs. So caravan runs might make a return. Maybe there'll be like battlegrounds and reasons, that kind of thing. So there'll be some PvP, but just not expecting like, you know, the mass open world faction v faction Zergy PvP. I'm not saying I'd actually know if Archeage had factions, but you know what I mean. They talk about how Jake Song has left, but they're obviously keeping pumping basically. I don't know what else you'd expect to a question like that, but okay. It does sound like that there's going to be more coming. I mentioned it in the dev blog, but they do say that there's going to be more updates focused on a couple of extra specific things, so like the trade skills and various different systems, and they say it's going to be worth the wait. Now, there's a question here where they get asked about a release date, and they say, as of right now, we are still focused for the first half of 2026. I'm going to tell you right now, #doubt. And there's a variety of different reasons why I doubt that. One of them is Chrono Odyssey, and the other is that MMOs get delayed. So if Chrono Odyssey gets delayed, are they going to push back Archeage Chronicles like further, or are they going to put Archeage Chronicles in front of Chrono Odyssey? Whilst they are technically two different development studios, the publisher is the same, and they'll be the ones to make that decision. And MMOs typically just always get delayed. So the first half of 2026, like, it sounds optimistic. I think we're going to be looking towards the end of 2026 personally, but you know, stranger things have happened. The end of 2026 could be absolutely banging, by the way. We could have Ion 2, Archeage Chronicles, plus something like Bellatores. Oh, could be spicy. Could be spicy. Anyway, they're the updates from Kakao and, you know, Archeage Chronicles and Chrono Odyssey right now. Both of them are making some, you know, big moves, getting ready to compete against Ion 2 perhaps, and we'll possibly find out more information on Wednesday. Now, they mentioned dates there for the Archeage Chronicles one. Let's be honest, when they speak in the financials, that's a lot more like likely to be accurate effectively. If the financials put it as the end of 2026, then you know it's not coming before then. I'm also curious how they will react to the Chrono Odyssey negative feedback. I suspect they'll just say, we had mixed feedback, some of it negative, some of it positive, and we're working to fix the negative. I mean, I've ruined my own video there. Tune in on Wednesday. I'll see you then. Have a most beautiful day. Goodbye.